I'm not that into grammar, but I often see announcements from nuclear energy companies that get their tense wrong. When they should use the future conditional, that something might happen in the future, they use the present tense, like it's already happening. I Googled world's first commercial fusion and found statements from Commonwealth Fusion, Helion, Type 1 Energy, Proxima, General Fusion, and Focused Energy, all talking about building a commercial fusion power plant. Not a single one of them has demonstrated that they can generate net energy, much less do it profitably. Type 1 Energy says on their website, bringing the power of the stars to Earth. They aren't bringing anything to anybody yet, and they won't be anytime soon, if ever. Helion says that their latest funding round will, quote, help us move faster towards our goal of building the industrial and manufacturing foundation needed to produce fusion generators at a massive scale. It would be worldwide news if they were able to build one power plant that generates electricity at a reasonable cost. Heck, it would be worldwide news if they built a power plant that generated electricity at any cost. I did a whole series on nuclear fusion and stated that most of the companies trying to commercialize fusion will fail. Yet these companies talk like what they're doing is as difficult as building a bridge. Another area of extreme hype is small modular reactors, nuclear fission power plants that are small enough to be built in a factory and delivered to a site, rather than the huge ones that are built on site. Valar Atomics says on their website that, quote, we're building hundreds of nuclear reactors. No, they aren't. They've built one test reactor that will produce no electricity. Allo claims on their website that, quote, we build mass manufactured nuclear plants that will power anything from a data center to a city. In reality, they, like Valar, have a single test reactor that can't produce electricity. I could go on with plenty of examples of overpromises. There's no evidence from any company anywhere in the world that the promises of delivering nuclear power quickly and affordably with SMRs are plausible. The country with the most active nuclear program, China, built one, shrugged, and continued on with building the traditional large reactors. Though I do think nuclear fusion and nuclear fission are the worst at overpromising, there are lots of green or clean tech companies out there, and it can be difficult to understand how close they are to being ready. That's why the Technology Readiness Levels, or TRLs, exist. TRLs provide a framework for investors and government program managers to compare different technologies and companies and consistently communicate how close they are to having a commercial product. So what I want to do is go through a bunch of technologies and companies that promise to power the future cleanly and cheaply and assess how close they are to being ready. Different organizations use different definitions of the levels and even a different number of levels. NASA's definitions are focused on space, while the Department of Energy's are focused on energy. I'm going to use my own definitions that simplify the story a bit and focus on how close these technologies are to being useful for fighting climate change. I call mine the Decarbonization Readiness Levels, or DRL. The DRLs have fewer steps in the early stages and more steps at the end. TRLs end when the technology is ready to move from development to commercialization. But to be able to scale and make an impact, we need to understand the cost and reliability of a technology, which isn't covered in the traditional TRLs. For this video, I'm going to focus just on grid technologies. So here's how I'm breaking it down. DRL 1, it's demonstrated that the concept is consistent with known physics. This is to eliminate zero-point energy devices or perpetual motion machines. DRL 2, it's determined that it's technically possible, but it might be uneconomical. DRL 3, a significant pre-commercial prototype is operational. DRL 4, there is a design that could be put into mass production. DRL 5, the design has been reviewed and approved by a competent third party like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. This step can be skipped for some technologies other than nuclear fission. DRL 6, A first-of-a-kind commercial power plant is being built. DRL 7, cost and reliability data is available from operational plants. Notice the plural. So let's look at major low-carbon technologies and judge their DRLs, starting with the most mature and moving to the most speculative. I'm going to skip technologies that are stable, like hydro and traditional geothermal. DRL 7, cost and reliability data is available from operational plants. These are technologies that are so mature that you can go and just order one and you have a reasonably good idea of how long it's going to take to deploy it and how much it's going to cost. Solar is obviously well past DRL 7, as is land-based wind. Plug-in solar has enough experience in Germany to easily meet this requirement. Shallow water offshore wind is in this category, with 93 gigawatts of new installation in 2025. That's the capacity of almost 9 large nuclear power plants. Grid-scale lithium batteries are now mainstream. Green hydrogen, where renewable electricity is used to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, is in this category. Since the cost of the hydrogen depends on the cost of the underlying electricity, this could arguably be considered DRL 6, as cost information is uncertain even if the cost and schedule of the electrolyzer is known. This is a good time to point out that for DRL 7, the cost has to be known. It doesn't have to be competitive. Some might think a technology that's been around as long as nuclear would be DRL 7. But almost every new nuclear power plant built has been plagued by cost and schedule overruns. The exception to this is in China, where 2 large pressurized water reactors were completed in under 7 years and connected to the grid last year. And it's where most new nuclear reactors are under construction. I'd say that large nuclear power plants are DRL 7 in China, but everywhere else they're DRL 6. DRL 6, a first-of-a-kind commercial power plant, is being built. For large nuclear power plants, as I just said, they're DRL 6, and I'm not sure they'll ever make it to DRL 7, since the problems seem to be getting worse. So we're building fewer of them, which will prevent us from gaining the experience needed to have the confidence we can build them on budget and schedule. For next-generation nuclear, there are 2 interesting companies that are building first-of-a-kind reactors that will deliver power: Natrium and Kairos. Both have received construction permits after a thorough review by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Whether these plants are able to generate electricity cost-effectively and at scale remains to be seen, but I think they're the 2 most interesting companies in the field. Another technology I put in as DRL 6 is floating wind turbines. About 50 turbines have been deployed and are delivering power to the grid, so we definitely have built a first-of-a-kind commercial power plant. But it's new enough that they're seen as a higher risk deployment than their shallow water cousins. The next technology that squeezes into DRL 6 is enhanced geothermal. This is a technology that looks like fracking for oil and gas, but instead of hydrocarbons, they're looking to strike hot rocks. In traditional geothermal, the rocks are hot and wet. The water is brought to the surface and used to make steam to run a generator. The required geology is rare, but hot, dry rocks are everywhere if you go deep enough. Fervo, the best known of the companies working on enhanced geothermal, has a plant under construction that they claim will generate electricity commercially. I find this claim credible, so we'll count them as DRL 6. There are several other companies working on enhanced geothermal, but I'm not aware of any other plant under construction that claims it will generate commercial electricity. I haven't yet done a video on enhanced geothermal. If you'd like me to, let me know in the comments. Though several fusion companies like CFS and Helion claim to be building commercial fusion plants, I don't find those claims credible, given that they have never run a prototype that produces net energy. So I'm not going to include them here. Feel free to flame me in the comments if you disagree. There are lots of interesting non-lithium battery technologies that are coming to market, like Form Energy's Iron Air battery or Energy Dome's CO2 battery, that are at DRL6. Interestingly, both of these companies have facilities being built in Ireland in the next few years. There are a whole bunch of technologies that require cheap, clean hydrogen, like green steel or synfuels. Until we have clean hydrogen at scale, these ideas are all stuck in DRL6. Once we have enough clean hydrogen, many of these ideas could scale quickly. DRL5. The design has been reviewed and approved by a competent third party, like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I can only think of one company that is at DRL5, NuScale. They have a design for a small, modular, pressurized light water reactor that's been approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. None are currently under construction, as the market has found them too expensive. But that could change. DRL4. There is a design that could be put into mass production. EcoWave Power from Israel had several small pilot installations of their wave power generator and are working on their first megawatt scale installation in Portugal. For tidal power, by far the most significant installation is the MyGen array, which has been generating up to 6 megawatts from 4 undersea turbines off the coast of Scotland for 8 years. Phase 2 of MyGen has a targeted commissioning date of 2027 through 2029 for 59 megawatts, which will boost them to DRL6. And though this might sound exciting, this is less than 2% of the UK's largest offshore wind farm. DRL3. A significant pre-commercial prototype is operational. Here we get into uncertainty about what makes a prototype significant. I'd argue that Helion's 7th prototype, Polaris, is significant. They've shared a few results, like the ability to fuse deuterium with tritium. This would be more impressive if that was their goal, but they need to fuse deuterium with helium-3, which is harder. So let's be generous and say that fusion meets DRL3. There are many technologies I mentioned above where there are other companies that have prototypes. Lots of SMR companies have built test reactors that have or are designed to reach criticality, which isn't nothing, but it's a long way from where Kairos and Natrium are. DRL2. We've determined it's technically possible, but it might be uneconomical. I did an interview with the CEO of Overview Energy, a company that wants to do space-based solar. I'm convinced that what they want to do is possible. White hydrogen is an interesting prospect. This is geological hydrogen that can be extracted in a similar manner to methane. In Mali, a well was discovered to be leaking natural hydrogen when it caught fire. They built a system to capture some of that hydrogen, and they use it to power a village. This is impressive, but not what I'd call significant. My guess is that if white hydrogen were common, we'd have found it in some of the hundreds of thousands of holes we've drilled in the ground. But it's possible that the ideal locations for white hydrogen are different enough than the locations for methane and oil that we've missed something big. We should know more in a few years, as companies currently are out prospecting for white hydrogen. If it is discovered, this would go from DRL2 to DRL7 in just a few years. There are also a lot of ideas around the storage and transport of hydrogen that fall into DRL2. Currently, hydrogen is very difficult to store and transport, so this problem has to be solved if we're ever to rely on hydrogen on a large scale. DRL1 is when we've demonstrated the concept is consistent with known laws of physics. I can't think of anything to go here. Maybe you have some ideas. If I missed one of your favorite technologies, let me know in the comments. Why are the DRLs important? It's because it's easy to get distracted by shiny new things. Here in Ireland, people are talking about nuclear like SMRs are ready to deploy. But the fact is that there are no SMRs that are ready to scale, and there are only 2 that are even close. And by close, I mean that maybe they'll be ready to start to scale in 5 years. If you're an investor or a science fiction writer, all of the levels are worth considering. If you're writing energy policy for the next 10 years, you should be focusing exclusively on things that have a DRL of 7. Even the things at DRL 6 can't be counted on to keep the lights on. They may never be scalable, or they might be too expensive. It's great to have a pilot project of something in DRL 6 or lower, like Scotland doing tidal power or the US doing SMRs. But these should be considered academic exercises, not a critical part of the grid. And if you hear a politician talking about something other than DRL 7 to be part of the grid, you should ask them why they aren't focusing on technologies that we know work. If you've learned something, I recommend liking and subscribing to my channel. And you can support the channel by buying me a pint or a YouTube thanks. Maybe you want to watch more of my videos on nuclear fusion or nuclear fission. And please forward this video on to everyone you know who easily gets distracted by shiny new things. What?